Hello, I'm EAC Chairman Thomas Hicks. The EAC is recognizing Women's History Month by interviewing women leaders in elections from across the country about their experiences in the field. Today, I'm pleased to speak with Alice Miller, Senior Policy Advisor at the Washington, D.C. Board of Elections. Ms. Miller has had a variety of roles at DCBOE, including serving as the Executive Director. Not only has Ms. Miller been a leader for the DCBOE, but she also previously served as COO and acting executive director for the EAC. Thank you for joining me today as we kick off Women's History Month. And we'll jump right into it. I only gave a brief overview of your experience in elections to start. Can you discuss how your career in public service began? And did you have any women who were mentors or role models?
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. I am so happy to be a part of this discussion. I think it's a very important one, and I appreciate you inviting me to participate. It's funny when you say, how did your career begin? Because I think, like with most people, it just kind of happened. It wasn't anything that I planned on doing, especially with respect to elections. But when you start working in elections, it gets in your blood and it gets in the bloodstream. I think even you know that, and you just can't let it go. So I started doing this back in 1989 and been doing it ever since. And from one level to another, starting as an attorney for the DC Board of Elections, and then working as the general counsel, then executive director. I actually did a dual role as both the general counsel and the executive director for a short period of time when the former executive director left. And I had I could do two jobs at one time. In other words, be my own counsel. That didn't last very long. But through the general election in 1986, I believe it was. But having said that, it's just something that I started doing and continue to do, and it just happened. And I've always liked it. I've always loved it. Always working with people, working with members of the public, and that's how it's happened. And my career just continued to build up from that point on. So I said 86, but I meant the 89 election into 90. So, and in terms of role models or mentors, I don't really think that I personally had any quote unquote mentors. I will say there are women that I admire, and Dorothy Height, for example, being one. You know, as you know, she was very significant with the National Council of Negro Women. Her leadership in that organization is remarkable. She also is the former president of a very wonderful organization, Delta Sigma Theta, Sorority Incorporated, and that organization in and of itself in 1913 took part in women's suffrage movement as a minority organization. In fact, as the first minority organization, women's organization to take part in that. Just a little bit of history there. They were actually put to the back of the parade, not allowed to march in front with the other women, but they were a Black women's organization, but they marched in back of the other women, marching nonetheless for women's suffrage in March of 1913. But that's the history as it is. Dorothy Height, as I said, is someone who I would look on as a role model for many reasons, but those are examples. That is an example of someone who I definitely respect and admire quite a bit. I would also, on a personal note, state that one person who I certainly admire, and if anyone would be a role model in my life, it would be my grandmother, who really had no formal education, but certainly found a way in her life to be very, very successful with everything that she did, just working as a cafeteria worker in DC at Trinity College. And she was very well respected and admired by all the girls there for her life and the career that she had there. But in doing that, she was able to manage her house, the home that she owned in Northwest DC, and never, even though I was through her and with her help and support, went through school, went through college, you know, and all of that, and turned to her when I needed things, and was always able to rely on her. I always say for my grandmother, with my grandmother, that you know, she was like the wind beneath my wings. So certainly someone who I would always call my personal role model, and anyone that I would admire, she would be at the top of that list.
That is great. With all your experience over the years, you know how much elections have evolved. We're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the signing of the Help America Vote Act this year. What are some of the most significant changes you've seen in elections in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I said, I've been doing this for a long time. When I first started in elections, there's no doubt that elections were just sleepy little events that happened once every 2 years, once every 4 years for presidential elections, maybe intermittently for some smaller elections that may have occurred on the local level. Nothing that anyone paid a whole lot of attention to. You know, you had your campaigns and you had people soliciting for votes and watching it a little bit, and you know, there was some interest, but they have certainly transformed in a major way. Now everybody pays attention to elections, and of course that all happened with the 2000 election. Elections are no longer sleepy little events that just occur. With the 2000 election, everything, I believe, just changed drastically. And I hate to put it on the hanging chads, but you know, the reality is, I think that is probably what changed elections, and probably changed it for the better, because with those changes, we were able to get money from the federal government put in elections to try to help election officials process and do things that were needed. We were able to standardize some processes that needed to be standardized. The infrastructure was put into place, and elections were given much more attention, much more credibility and stability that needed to happen. I think people used to believe that you just went to bed, wake up, and you go vote. And now, obviously, everyone knows that is not what happens. It's a whole nother, you know, long process. Our process truly starts at least 18 months out with respect to preparation and everything that's needed before elections. So we have definitely changed. We have more pundits than we ever had before. Everyone knows everything when it comes to elections, even those who don't. But, and of course, the agency, the EAC, was established, and long overdue, needed entity to assist with the process to help election officials with respect to distribution of money and other resources for elections. So all of that has changed drastically, and even the way we conduct elections, you know, has changed. But we can talk about that, you know, a little bit later, I think. But yeah, it's been some drastic changes since I've started in elections, major.
Yeah. What are some of the changes or initiatives that you've implemented during your time at the DC Board of Elections?
That I have personally? Yeah. So we have, well, we have, okay. One of the first things that I did long ago, when accessibility was just beginning to be at the forefront of elections, after being sued by my friend Jim Dixon, who I love dearly, and we are very close. I love him. He took us to court, sued DC Board of Elections, and from that point on, we were one of the first jurisdictions to have a dual process in place, where we have both the electronic and the paper processes in place. Now, anybody can vote on any system. You do not have to be a disabled voter in order to select the electronic system. So we have both systems going in all of our vote centers, in all of our presets, whichever we're going to operate. So that's one thing that we've done. The other would be now we have our vote by mail, which we started in 2020 in terms of everybody receiving a mail ballot. We always had the request, but in 2020, due to COVID, we mailed everybody a ballot, whether they requested or not. We will continue that process with our June election coming up this year. And there is now pending legislation for that process to go forward beyond June, although there was no money put in the budget for that to happen for the June primary. We were able to get funding for it so that we will have that going forward for our primary election. Our mail ballot drop boxes, that's something that we put in place. We also have ballot on demand, which was not at every precinct. Before, we had to have paper ballots, which meant we were limited to precinct only because the ballots are distributed by precinct. With ballot on demand, we have the options for operating more vote centers. Obviously, because anybody can go anywhere, they're not limited to their home precinct, because any ballot can be printed at any location based on wherever a voter lives. So we put the ballot on demand in place. Also, I would say our poll worker training process has evolved, which is a very important part of the election process. If poll workers aren't properly trained, then everything can just go awry once election day comes around. So I put in place what's called continuing poll worker training. And that is during the break between an off election year and an on election year, we train our poll workers in those salient positions that require points of concentration where they seem to make the most mistakes. We continue to train them and bring them back in so that they are always made aware of things they need to recognize and put focus on. So during the summer, for example, we would have training of our precinct captains or our head elected officials, those who are doing the registration as they come in, making sure the voters are registered and going through the address checks and things like that, pointing out where the mistakes were made. So we have continuing poll worker training, and we will this year for the first time have online training available for our poll workers so that they can have, they'll do the online training before they come in, then we'll do the hands-on training, and then they can go back over and have the online training available for them before they come into the vote centers before election day. So those are just a few things.
Wow, that's a lot, actually. And you talked about the online training for poll workers, but for this year. But looking forward, what are some of the notable changes you would like to see in elections in the coming years?
Yeah, I think just generally, I like vote centers, and I think vote centers are good. If more jurisdictions could look at doing that, it makes it easier for voters to vote, and we should be focusing on ease of voting. And so if voters can get to a place, a locality to vote, easier to vote, and figure out how to do it, vote centers are certainly something that work a lot better. We do have same-day registration in DC, and that's something also that I think more jurisdictions are going toward with the proper credentials. I'm not just saying you just go in. Obviously, you need the proper credentials to vote. And with that in place, same-day registration has worked well for us because no voter is turned away. And even if they don't have it, obviously, based on HAVA, there's provisional voting. So that happens as well. Expanded voting hours. That is something that also needs to be looked at to allow voters who don't have the normal 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, work hours available to them. Individuals have children and all kinds of various things in their personal lives that may not allow them to comport to those normal kinds of, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. time frames to vote. So, and I know there are religious observations that some folks really do take in serious consideration, where they may prefer to vote on a Sunday, versus the Friday or Saturday, because that may be their religious day of observation. So expanded voting hours are something that we need to also look at. And yeah, so that's something.
Okay. No, it's also really great. Now you've served in a variety of roles with the EAC, both as a staffer and as a board member. And so based on your experience, what are some ways federal agencies like the EAC are assisting state and local election officials like yourself? And what other opportunities can there be?
Right. So, recently election officials have been threatened, seriously threatened. Their lives have been threatened. A lot of my colleagues have been, and those things have really deterred election officials from even continuing. Some have left, and others have been scared for themselves and their families. So I know DOJ has put together a task force to address threats against election officials, and they need to collaborate more with the local law enforcement agencies to make certain that local election officials are adequately protected and their families are adequately protected. Respect to elections, Homeland Security, and working with the infrastructure and security of networks, CISA, that has been quite a great resource for us in terms of securing the elections and being able to point to that for individuals and those entities who want to say that our elections are not secure. CISA is a great resource. That entity has been working a lot more closely with NAS and NASAD to make certain that we're all on the same page when things happen, and we can speak from the same page, same records, I guess. EAC, of course, has been a great source with respect to being able to provide informational materials and a funding source that the government has distributed through the EAC. All of that is very important. So I guess what we need to do, there could be more aggressive information that's put out there in combating the misinformation that comes out, and combating the falsehoods that seem to come out. I think that the federal government could take a stronger stance in that. There's too much of that, and too many people believe it, and it sends the wrong message. I don't know how that can be done, but there needs to be conversations around that, I believe.
I agree with that. What advice as a woman in elections do you have for other women who may be interested in a career in elections or in public service?
So first of all, think long and hard before you decide you want to do this. Okay. As I said, I think once you get into it, you don't leave it. It gets in your blood. It's easy to get in your blood. One of the things I think you need to understand is that this is not a political job. This is not getting into a job because you support one side or one position or one cause or another. This is complete. You're working this from a complete objective perspective, and you are administering elections, and you want to do that. You want to make certain that, as we say, whoever wins, you win and win big, right? Because we don't want to go through this again. We don't want to do recounts. We don't want to, have to count and recount and recount. We want to make sure the integrity of the process is in place. There is no support for one candidate or one position more than another. So I think it's important for everybody to understand, in the administration of what we do, we are administering the process. We are not supporting and nor do we care about pros or cons, candidate A or candidate B, but just the administration of it. So it's not a political job. It's an administrative job, and that's what needs to be understood. I think people, women in particular, are always held to a higher standard than men, and from that perspective, you have to be able to accept criticism. So you need tough skin, and the ability to do that is most important, but also to understand that you are working with all kinds of stakeholders. You're working with the community, you're working with individuals who are just at the ground level of elected officials, right? They may just be representing the community versus those who are on the Senate or the congressional or the mayoral level, but they're all just as important. There's no one who is less important than another, regardless of what their elected choice may be in terms of office they may be running for. Anyone coming into this field has to have the ability to multitask, and in terms of an ego, it's non-existent. Anyone who has an ego does not need to be working in elections, because egos are left at the door. I have done everything from stuffing envelopes to being on the phone, advising folks who call in where their precinct is, to literally appearing before the Hill from time to time and testifying, or regularly giving testimony before our own legislative body on the status of our elections and budget needs and things of that nature. But it spans the whole course, and there is nothing that is too good. Or too small rather. We work in a warehouse environment, and we work in an office environment. It doesn't matter. It is whatever is needed. I have delivered ballots. I have counted ballots. So there is no ego in this role, in this job. There's just accountability, transparency, in the need to get the job done, and the necessity to maintain objectivity.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and being a role model for women in elections and for people of color in general. And I want to thank you, Ms. Miller, for not only joining me today, but also your leadership and dedication to the voters of DC and your over 30 years of experience in elections. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Again, I think this is a good series, and I hope your listeners get something out of it. Thanks again.